Just put it way over there on the counter or on the floor by the stove. They're just about to start the interview, which is going to last 2 hours.
I'm going out to the produce shed this afternoon. Do you want anything?
No, I've got stuff I'm still working. Oh, yes, I do want a watermelon. Not too big, not too big. My name is Maddie Etoyle Kirby Mouser. I dropped the Maddie after I picked up my married name, Mouser, because it was a little much. So I use Etoyle Kirby Mouser now. Now, I was born on November 11th, 1925, and that, as you may recall from history, was before the Depression, before the Second World War, and several wars since then. I lived on the farm, a little 80-acre farm in Faulkner County, in a little community called Spring Hill, which was not a town even then, and still is not a town, but is a very active, viable community with one Association Baptist Church, Missionary Baptist Church. And so everybody went to the church, everybody sang, and when I was little, by the way, you had earlier mentioned awards. When I was a baby, I won a silver cup for being, they said, the most perfect baby. It was from an insurance company, and I think they chose me because I was chubby. I had a rather round face and, not much hair at that time, and I was kind of chubby. At any rate, it was a wonderful community, and we had a very active church. We had a very active Sunday school, a large Sunday school, because there were lots of, it was all farm families, and most of them had 3 or 4 children, some more. But that was the usual thing. And our social life was around the church. In fact, on Sunday afternoons, after Sunday school, generally the kids would go to one of the members' houses for lunch and play in the afternoon. And then we went back to church on Sunday nights. It was a very unsophisticated kind of place, but most people were very honest. And of course, we never thought, we didn't even have locks on our doors. And in fact, I lived in a dog trot house, a very old one. I don't know the date of it, but it wasn't until the year that I went away to college that Daddy built a new house. And times were very hard, of course, soon after I was born. And I can't say much about those first 5 years. When I was 5 years old, we did move to a Greenbrier farm for just 1 year, and then came back to this place which my daddy had bought 80 acres of land from his uncle who raised him. And this brings me to say that when my daddy he was born in 1902, and when he was 7 years old, his father was going rabbit hunting with just an old-fashioned shotgun, and he was climbing a fence and shot his big toe off. And this was before penicillin or before tetanus shots, and he got gangrene, which was a very deadly thing, and died when my daddy was 7. After a little while, his mother remarried to a distant cousin, a Milam, and my daddy's mother had been a Milam, or was a Milam. Soon after she remarried, she died. Now, I'm not sure of her cause of death. I suspect it was pneumonia. That was what killed a large number of people. that was before the flu epidemic of 1918. So Daddy was one of three surviving children. His daddy was just 29 years old when he died, and his mother was just 31. And so he had a sister 2 years older and a brother 2 years younger. There had been three other children born to this couple, but it was not unusual for babies to die as infants because there were no super drugs or anything like that at the time, and not many doctors. The only doctor in Greenbrier was miles away and had to come by, I guess, in the earliest days of my life, by buggy or wagon, although he soon got a car. We didn't have a car until I was, probably 10 years old or something like that. We used a wagon and we had mules. We didn't have horses, but we had two mules, and those are work animals. I don't know how much you know about horses and mules, but mules are work animals for the whole agricultural South, where cotton was king at that time. Even after the Civil War, if we needed to go to Greenbrier, which was maybe 3 miles from us, it was a little trip to go even there to see the doctor, and the doctor made house calls. And of course, all the babies were born at home. We didn't know about the hospital. There was a small hospital early on in Conway, which was like 10 or 12 miles away, and it would be a trip. In fact, our shopping would be about twice a year. We would go in the wagon to Conway, and it'd probably take an hour. I can't remember exactly because I was real small at that time. But we would go down in the spring and usually again in the fall. And of course, some people made trips in between for supplies and that sort of thing. But of course, you'd buy a 50-pound sack of flour and a 50-pound sack of sugar and maybe a 10-pound sack of salt, the essentials for cooking. And of course, we always had good food. We never knew we were poor. Everybody around us was poor. And we did have plenty to eat. We had a good garden spot, and a big one, and we grew lots of vegetables. And Mother, as other housewives did, canned in glass jars. And it was good when we got a pressure canner. And, dozens of green beans and dozens of tomatoes and corn. And my daddy helped because this would be in the summer when the crops would have been laid by so that they could grow and mature in the hottest part of the summer. And he was helping can one day, can corn, and it was for some reason, more tedious than other kinds of canning. It was easy to can green beans and tomatoes, but he had an explosion, and the corn covered his left arm and just took all of the skin off of that. And of course, it took a long time for it to heal, but it did heal successfully. And we knew it was hard times, but we thought it was supposed to be that way because it had come on gradually. And by the 30s, when I was 5 years old in 1930, and I started school when I was 5, just for a little while. And I did ride, well, no, we walked a mile to the Spring Hill School. And back, but it was bad. There was no money, and you used to live on what you had mostly. Like I said, now we would grow a few bales of cotton in the fall, and we'd have just a little bit of money, but it was so sparse. But we never went hungry, and we didn't have that kind of devastation in our little community. We had a lot of support, and then I guess there came a few government programs. I know there was a mattress making. The government supplied the ticking for mattresses and the cotton batting to fill mattresses. And there would be a community group meet at the church to make new mattresses. And just there were a few other government programs where they gave out supplies like of essential things for cooking, like flour and of course during Second World War, which was a decade later, um, there were rationing programs, but by then times were a little bit better. But there were rationing programs, and you just nobody, it didn't matter if you had money or not, you couldn't buy sugar and you couldn't buy tires and you couldn't, well, you'd get a minimum a few gallons of gasoline if you had a car. And by then we did have a car. We did have some music in the community. Our next door neighbor was a family of musicians. They were all boys, and they played the guitar and the banjo and the tambourine and, the fiddle, it was called. We didn't have violins, they were fiddles. To this day, I don't think there's any difference between a fiddle and a violin, although it was all country tunes. And we would go down to our neighbor's house on Saturday nights, my family did, because they had a battery radio. Now, it was, probably 18 inches wide and 8 or 10 inches high, and it had big batteries in it to operate. Now, reception was not very good, especially if the weather was stormy. There would be lots of static, so it was difficult to hear. But we'd listen to the Grand Ole Opry and Fibber McGee and Molly and Lum and Abner and Laurel and Hardy. Those are some of the programs I remember. And then when I got into high school, we got a radio at home, and again, it was batteries because we didn't have electricity, like I said, until after I graduated. But there was a story hour. Portia Loves Life was the name of the show, and I couldn't wait to get home off the school bus and turn the radio on to hear that story, to see what was going to happen next. We did play games at school, mostly outside, and the schoolhouse was next door to the church, and on above the schoolhouse was the cemetery, and the cemetery is still there. And I mentioned that Spring Hill Cemetery, and the Kirbys, and I was Etoyle Kirby, are buried there, and my mother and daddy are buried there. But my brother, whose wife was killed in a car accident many years ago, she's buried outside of Little Rock there at Pinecrest. I think I'm not sure if it's still in Pulaski County. And then my sister is buried in Conway, and she died in 2000. She was 2 years younger than I was. I was planning to be an old maid school teacher, and I was serious about that. Until the first year I was teaching school, and I'll say more about that later. And I met Billy, my husband. But I really was not interested in the boys. Now, and I just had one special girlfriend. It just happened that there weren't many girls my age, my particular year. There were at least four I can think of, but two of us just did everything together. In fact, Mother and Daddy fought that. They wanted us to be a little more, but we were intellectually oriented, and the other kids were not. And it was just a natural thing. She was 2 years older than I was. She was my brother's age, but we were great friends. And but she went to college 2 years before I did, and she prepared to teach and did teach in Arkansas a few years. Then she went to New Mexico to teach, and I pretty much lost contact with her after that, my very best friend. But my sister, 2 years younger, had a whole group of girls, friends, and I would sometimes do things with them, but I really wasn't interested in that. In fact, earlier than that, I wasn't interested in dolls, and it was just as well because we couldn't afford many dolls. I know one Christmas, I don't remember how old I was. I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and I got a doll for Christmas, and she was, I can remember still what she looked like. She had a blue organdy dress, and she was a little girl doll, not a baby doll. But my sister got a baby doll, and if you're going to have a doll, that's the kind to have, is a baby doll, so you can cuddle them and that sort of thing. She was a more normal, and she was more like a tomboy, and her friends, played outside a lot. But at school, we would play games like Red Rover, and I don't know if you know that game, but the whole group chooses up sides, just two sides, and the sides stand several, probably 10 or 15 feet opposite, maybe 20 feet, and they run at each other. And I can't recall what the point of that was, but one of the years, I think I was 8 years old, when one of my friends was running backward and I was running forward, and her head hit my nose and fractured it. But it didn't hurt that much, and I just went on home, and of course I told Mother about it, but it didn't bother me or anything. But then in a day or two it started getting black and blue, and we went to church on Sunday. By then, it was blue all across my face from one ear to the other, and people were very candid. They told it like it was. They said, "What in the world is wrong with that child?" And it scared us. So we went to the doctor in Greenbrier that afternoon, Sunday afternoon, and the doctor looked at it and he said, "Well, it is fractured, but it's already started healing, and I would have to re-break it to straighten it," and said, "I don't think it's going to ever bother you, but if you want me to do it, I will." We said no, and so my nose has been pretty flat up there ever since. It has never bothered me at all.
Were your parents very, were they affectionate? Did they tell you they loved you a lot? Like, what was that relationship like?
I can't recall our talking about "I love you." They demonstrated love always and everything. In fact, I told you that we went to the two-room schoolhouse through the 8th grade, and I know that in the wintertime, of course, we don't have a lot of snow and ice in Arkansas, but one year I recall it did come a snow a few inches, and Daddy came to school, brought one of the mules, and for Betty and me to ride back, to take us home on the mule, just because of the snow and ice. And I mean, that's a way of demonstrating love. He wouldn't have had to do that. We could have walked through it. We wore high-top shoes and brown cotton stockings, and my sister did not like those brown cotton stockings. And so when we would leave the house, get a distance from the house in the morning, she would roll her stockings down to her ankles, and then she had to roll them back up before she got home. there was a little branch. I don't know if you know what a branch is. It is a very small stream, like 10 or 12 feet wide, that ran close to the church and school. In the spring, when the rains would come, it would get quite a bit deeper and muddy because it would wash the silt down from above. And we had new dresses. Uncle John, and I want to say more about him, the one that raised Daddy. He was fairly affluent, and he would buy us, he would buy a big piece of calico, print calico, and Mother was a good seamstress, and I don't know how she had managed to get a Singer sewing machine, which is still a classic sewing machine, and she got real good at that, and she made all of our clothes, including shirts and dresses, although girls didn't wear pants. Women didn't wear pants for a long time. After that, it was all dresses. My mother would sometimes sell a dozen eggs for a dime, and by the way, there was a man a couple of miles away from us who was a barber, and I think he charged 10 cents or a quarter for a haircut. But Daddy, my daddy got some hair cutting equipment, and he cut hair for several people, and I think he got 10 cents a piece for it when he did. Our parents were pretty reasonable, and of course my brother was 2 years older, and boys were valued more than girls back then, and he got a bicycle, and Betty and I never had a bicycle. After he got too big, I guess, to ride it, we could ride his bicycle, but we never got a bicycle. Well, that's just the way it was. You didn't think about that. You didn't talk about that. No, the woman's place was in the home, and the mothers, the housewives, taught the girls how to. I was cutting corn on the off the cob the other day, and I thought, this is the way my mother did it. She took the tops off the corn, and you need a really sharp knife for cutting corn off of a cob, but it makes wonderful cream-style corn. You don't get that kind of corn anymore. And
when did that start to change?
Oh, of course, it's been so long, and it's been gradual. But after World War II, things became different. Let me talk a little bit about my college days. Just that every summer, I did not go to summer school, so I worked in the summers, a different job each summer. The first summer, Uncle John's wife, Aunt Helen, was deathly ill, and he hired me to stay with them. She just lived a couple of weeks after I got there, so she was dying slowly while I was there. So that was one experience, my first experience with death firsthand. And then the next summer, I worked at an ordnance plant. By the way, I'm a let's see. Rosie the Riveter, you know. The women who worked in the war did all sorts of things. And I worked in an ordnance plant at Jacksonville, which made detonators and fuses for ammunition. I worked as a government inspector just for that summer, and I lived with one of Mother's sisters who lived in North Little Rock, and I did shift work, and that was an eye-opener for us. I guess I was 18 then, because maybe 17, because you had to be somewhere like that. But anyway, I looked out on that. I got a job as a government inspector just for the summer. The detonators were very small things. They were just about as big around as the end of my little finger. And they were supposed to be smooth on the top. And they would put 50, they would pack, the people who were working on the line would pack 50 of them in a little, I think it was cardboard, probably some kind of box, all flat. And we would have to examine those for burrs, metal spurs that would come up. And we had to reject the whole lot of them if there were 2 or 3 in there that had, maybe it was just one, I don't remember about that. And the other thing we made were fuses for a large gun, and they were 2 or 3 inches long and about an inch in diameter. And they had moving parts inside them and a little hole near the top. And you had to pick one of those up and look through it. In fact, it had 2 holes, and there were parts that were supposed to be moving parts. And if they weren't moving or capable of moving, then we'd have to reject the lot of them. And they had buildings that were designed for burning that ammunition that had to be destroyed. But of course, we were, you know, factories were turning out things as fast as they could for the war effort. I mean, the way the United States geared up for World War II was absolutely astounding, because everybody favored going to the war. I say everybody. There were a few conscientious objectors. In fact, there were some twins who went to ASTC who were conscientious objectors. That meant they were not willing to go fight in a war. Now, a lot of conscientious objectors would go into like the nursing services and that kind of thing. And of course, what we have now is volunteer army. We do not have a draft. I don't know when, I can't remember when the draft was initiated, but whether it was before, because we were kind of building up our military, but not expecting the Pearl Harbor attack. We were in no way prepared, fully prepared for an all-out war. We hardly could take it in, you know. We hardly realized, but we were shocked and angered. We were very mad at the Japs, we called them. But it was so much bigger. It was 9/11 1,000 times, more than 1,000 times bigger. Because, well, now, we were never bombed on our homeland. That would be the more shocking thing. It may happen sometime, nuclear war, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Hiroshima, some people call it. But we were certainly glad for the atomic bomb to be done. And the way that was engineered and produced in total secret, almost total secret. I've read a book about the installation at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where a lot of the atomic materials for the atomic bomb were done. And the people who worked there had no idea, because they were working on one component or another, and they were not supposed to talk about what they were doing. And they had no idea that it was going to be an atomic bomb. It's hard to say it was a good thing to do, because it killed millions and millions of people, but it prevented, you know, hundreds of times more deaths. So it was scary, and it's been a deterrent now for from the 45, that's 55, 60, 75, 78 years since Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed. And I think that's the effects of that, I mean, the memories of that and what it could do, have been a great thing to keep us from having that kind of devastation again. We're not far from it now, I don't think, sadly. My husband, your granddad, was in the Pacific theater of war, in the all around the islands, the Solomon Islands, the Fiji, New Guinea, the Philippines. In fact, he was in the Philippines when MacArthur made his return to, and that was close to the end of the war. And he was quite a fighter. He went out in the front of enemy fire and rescued some people. He went from the foxhole into enemy fire. And he didn't speak much, like other veterans, didn't speak much about the war, but he did comment one time about, a dead Jap falling in the hole with him. And at that time, of course, the Japanese, and this Jap was a derogatory term, of course, and after the war was over, it very soon changed back, and it was always shocking to me about how quickly after the war we became friends rather than enemies with Japan, and have been great trading partners with them for a long time. And of course they had a great culture. But there's all that problem of the war and the terrible devastation of it and the islands, and they built trenches and all sorts of places to take refuge, dug back into the mountains and hills in those islands, and so they were very, very dangerous. But anyway, he did rescue some people, I don't know how many, from the firing, the shooting. And he received a Silver Star, which is one of the highest awards that the military gives in the country. Billy, my husband, came home from the war in January. It took a long time to muster out 1.5 million men that I think I'm right about that were in service at the end of the war. And so I had his younger brother, in my class at school as a junior in high school. And so there were other boys coming home from the war too. And all they knew to do was go visit their family members at the high school. So he came to the school to see what the school was like, because they all left the week after they graduated from high school. They went to basic training to go to the war. I mean, they didn't have choices, really. But that's what all of them wanted to do. They wanted to go fight the war. After Billy came to my class, I don't remember anything else of that first week, but by the beginning of the second week, we started dating, and we saw each other just about every day. Those boys had been gone 2 or 3 or 4 years, and they were ready to find a girl and start a family, start on their rest of their life. Anyway, we had a short courtship. I told you I had planned to be an old maid teacher, but that kind of changed when he came along. And you had asked earlier about my dating, and I didn't date much. There weren't many boys there, but I did walk down the road. By one boy who was somewhat attracted to me, but he walked me home from church. But you understand, Daddy and Mother were either ahead or behind us several paces, and we walked on each there were ruts in the road, and he walked in one and I walked in. That was my courtship. I didn't have many boyfriends. He was the only one I remember from as long as I lived at Spring Hill. Now, I dated, well, in high school, like for graduation, to prom or something, I had a date. I just wasn't interested in boys. And then I had a few dates with a soldier who came home from the war, but I didn't date many people because I wasn't interested in pursuing marriage. He was very persuasive, so I fell for him, and that's a natural thing, I think. That's what God intends for you to do. And he had a lovely family, and they were very accepting of me because they wanted the best for him. His dad gave us a big Hudson 8 car, and we would come to Pine Bluff often for movies and go out to dinner, sometimes with another couple there. And David dated the daughter of the superintendent of the school, and I had her in class. I had both of them in class, but we double dated with them some to come to the movies in Pine Bluff, and that was another lovely family. But his family was very welcoming to me. In fact, his dad was very prominent. And for Christmas that year, he gave me a $100 bill. I'd never seen a $100 bill in my life. So we became engaged probably in 3 or 4 months, and we married in July. He came home in January, and we married in July. His folks had gone on a trip to California. His mother and daddy and Nancy had gone to California. I think David stayed home and worked. He was younger than Billy. But Billy wrote to them, because I don't remember having telephones. He may have called, but I can't remember that. And he had a brother older than Billy who had died before I got in the family. He had graduated from high school, and the next week he had a bad attack of appendicitis, and we didn't have a local hospital, like at Stuttgart. They took him to Little Rock. His family took him to Little Rock to St. Vincent, and he had surgery, which was successful, supposedly, and about 4 or 5 days later, he was still there in the hospital. He had some sort of brain hemorrhage or something that killed him. And they have said that his mother, that I called Mama, was never the same after that. But she was a wonderful woman, which I'd maybe talk about later.
Can you tell me about your engagement?
Oh.
How were you proposed to? How did the wedding go? Did you honeymoon somewhere? What were those early years of marriage like?
Okay. Well, our courtship, I've already told you, was short, and since we had a good car, we for entertainment we would have to go out of Humphrey and go to Stuttgart or Pine Bluff, or I don't remember whether we ever went to Little Rock during that short period of time, but he did have to be hospitalized. He had picked up tropical malaria in the South Pacific, and it's a bad kind. It stays in your blood the rest of your life, and it weakened his heart. That was the thing that led probably to his early demise, early death. But he was just over there for a week during the spring months of that year. The wedding was at Humphrey in the Methodist church there. And I'd been a Baptist all my life. And my mother had said she would rather see me put in a grave rather than go to the Methodist church. Now, I don't mean just to go one time, but to join the Methodist Church. She got over that later. She discovered that I could still be a Christian and not be and be a member of the Methodist Church. But I didn't join the Methodist Church for 40 years after I married, so because of what she had said. But she loved Billy dearly. But we did have it there, and we just each had one attendant. My attendant was this girl that I had told you earlier. I didn't call her name. Mildred Wilcox was her name. And she had a withered arm. Polio was rampant just before the Salk vaccine was discovered. And she had had polio as a child, like 4 or 5 years old. And so her left arm didn't grow as much as her right arm. It was shorter and it was lifeless. She could take her other hand and pick that hand up and hold things with it, but she couldn't. But after she left Arkansas to teach school in New Mexico, she would drive from New Mexico back to Arkansas to visit in summers and that sort of thing before she married. Well, even after she married out there. And the honeymoon, yes, we did. The first night, we came to Pine Bluff and stayed in the Old Pines Hotel, which was still operating at that time. And the building's still there downtown, but it's been closed for, 30 or 40 years. It was still operating when we moved to Pine Bluff in 1960. But we stayed there one night, and then the next night we stayed in Little Rock. The reason we were delayed from going down to the beach was that Billy had an appointment. I guess he had applied for disability VA pension, and he was scheduled for a physical exam on the second day after we were married in Little Rock at the state office of the VA. And we stayed in the Sam Peck Hotel that second night. It hasn't been Sam Peck for a long time. Not sure if it's operating. It was over close to the post office there in Little Rock. But Sam Peck is still a prominent name in Little Rock historical circles anyway. And so he thought, I guess he thought they wouldn't change it. He didn't ask for a change, and it worked out okay. Like I said, we stayed the first night at the Pines, then we stayed in Little Rock at the Sam Peck the second night. Then we went down to the Gulf Shores, no, not Gulf Shores, to the Biloxi, Pascagoula area, where my friend, I told you had been my roommate the first year I taught, she and her husband were living down there at Pascagoula and had invited us to come down there. So we went down there and stayed for a week. And I got the worst sunburn of my life because we went out on a boat to Santa Rosa Island, which is, 15 or 20 miles offshore, I think. And the sand, it was so white there. We were just out there a couple of hours, but I was baked, and I was so sore for several days. But we had a good trip and, went crabbing and that sort of thing that I haven't done since then. I have been back to the Gulf Shores area 3 or 4 times since then. He did get me a little diamond, and Hunter Mouser, his half-brother, who was 10 or 12 years older than he was, his wife's name was Hunter, and she came to Pine Bluff with him to Kahn's jewelry store to buy the wedding rings, and so I did have a nice small diamond. Later, the diamond that I have now, he gave me in 1966, I believe, just before we bought this house. And at the time, he was working, but on commission, and it was uncertain, and he, I guess, made a good big sale or something, because it's a very fine big diamond, about a carat and a half. And I said, when I got it, I said, oh, we're going to have to send it back. We can't afford this. But I've grown attached to it in the meantime. He liked pretty things real well. And he bought me pretty things to begin with, but nearly everything he bought me didn't fit. And I have to take them back. And so finally, he just didn't buy clothes or anything like that. I can remember one dress that he bought me was so pretty. He had not had any college. So that fall, I lived with his mother and daddy there in Humphrey. And he went to ASTC. He rode the bus up, or sometimes he got rides with other students because there were quite a few students going to ASTC at that time. And he would come home on Friday afternoons and then go back late Sunday afternoon to ASTC for that year. And then I quit teaching for 2 years and thought, and I went back to finish my work, which I did. We went to summer school, and then the next fall. And then in January of the following year, we went to transfer to Fayetteville because he was majoring in agriculture and business, and they didn't have a major in agri. They did have some courses for the first 2 years, but then he went to Fayetteville. We lived up there 2 years, and I worked in a university housing office while he went to classes. And then he had not graduated. He was in his senior year. He was not a strong student. He really wasn't academically inclined. Very bright, but not academically inclined. And his dad and mother in the winters would go somewhere and stay 2 months during the coldest part of the winter. They went to Hot Springs several years and took the hot baths over there, you know. And he was over there when he had a stroke. When he had surgery. He developed prostate cancer. And we dropped out of school. He dropped out of school, and we came to Hot Springs and just stayed in the hotel room with them. I mean, a hotel room there. And we ate at Frankie's across the street for a few weeks, and then we went on to Humphrey, and they came home after a while. But we lived with them for close to a year, and then they gave us a little house which was in very poor repair, and we had it remodeled and lived in it just behind their big house. And we lived there for 9 more years. I had taught 2 years at Humphrey, and then after being out at Fayetteville for 2 years, we came back and then I taught 9 more years there. So after 11 years, we moved to Pine Bluff. I had met the department chairman, English department chairman from Pine Bluff, and was very fond of her. And we came to Pine Bluff to live. And he was a traveling salesman, and he could live either place. We didn't have our first baby until we'd been married 5 years, and so we had to work at getting the first baby, and that was in 1951 when Kirby was born. We were married in 46, and then we had Kirby in 51, and then it was 5.5 years before we had Scott, your daddy. So that was it for as far as family went. We'd been trying for 2 years to have a baby, and all of the young families wanted to have children then. I didn't know of anybody that didn't want to have children. Now, there are probably more that don't want to have children, but that's God's plan, to have children for carrying on the generations. Anyway, that's a different discussion. The day that Kirby was born was a very happy day. For one thing, I had been carrying him. I was 4 weeks overdue. Now, you know, my friends all said, I miscounted the date. I don't think I miscounted the date because like I said, we'd been trying for 2.5 years to have a baby. And anyway, I gained 40 pounds, so it was all in one big bump out here. But I was healthy. And when I went into labor, it was midnight. And I got up and shampooed my hair and rolled it in flat curls with bobby pins before we drove to Pine Bluff to the hospital to have that baby. And he was born the next morning at 11:30, I think. But that was not a wise decision to do that. It worked out for me. But now, Nancy, when one of hers was born, I think it was the third one, Mark, she just barely made it to the hospital. They were still living in Humphrey, too. And I stayed in the hospital 5 days. Now, most of the girls, if all goes well, they go home the same day or maybe stay 1 or 2 nights in the hospital, depending on if there are any repercussions, complications. But I stayed 5 days and then went home in an ambulance, which, looking back on it, seems real funny because girls now would certainly not even consider doing that sort of thing. Like I said, we did everything with Nancy and Speedy. We came to Pine Bluff to see a movie, or Nancy and I would go to Stuttgart shopping once a month when we got our paycheck. She taught too. And Billy's work was always usually commission, and so when he did well, he would have money, and when he didn't do well, which was a good part of the time, he was never very commercially successful, but he always worked. And when in the summers then, the boys and I would travel with him. He traveled South Arkansas mostly, and then went as far northeast when he sold crop insurance for 3 or 4 years, and that's what he was doing when I found out I was pregnant with Scott. We were in a cotton field up at out from Blytheville when I got real sick, and I was okay by the next day, but that's when I found out that I was, and we also had to work for a couple of years to get Scott. I mean, and the doctor said that the effect of the tropical malaria that Billy got in the South Pacific was a factor involved in his low sperm count. So that worked out okay. And we thought we wanted to have a little girl too, but we never did, which is, we went on, life went on, and we didn't dwell on that. Yeah, I was 44 and he was 45, and your dad was 13, and Uncle Kirby had 1 year at Hendricks. He was, like I said, 5'9". He was 19, I guess, at that time. And of course it was hard, but it was in July when he died. He had had his first heart attack. He was in the National Guard after the war. After he came home from the war, he signed up for the National Guard, and he'd been in the National Guard for 14 years. And on every summer, he would go for 2 weeks summer camp, those people in the National Guard, and they'd drill once a month. They'd go for a weekend once a month. Now, he still would come home on those weekends. It was 2 days, but at Stuttgart for the drill. But on the summer camp at Camp Robinson, and they would have a visitor's day, and the family would all come, and they had a military parade when we went to that encampment. Um, and after that, he had his first heart attack when he was at summer camp, and that made me eligible. That's active duty. When you go to summer camp, you're on active duty with the Army, and it made me eligible to be a surviving spouse. And so all these years I have received a VA pension because of that. And when the boys were still under 22 and in college, they received a stipend for going to college. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to send Kirby to Hendrix College or your dad to Louisiana Tech, because the out-of-state tuition at Louisiana Tech was $10,000 a year. And on a teaching salary, I didn't have that kind of money. But he got a band scholarship the first year, and that covered his tuition, so we could manage the housing and that sort of thing. He had had 2 other heart attacks in the meantime, so this was the 4th one he'd had over a 2.5-year period. The second one that he had, well, and I will say that he was in the Air Force hospital there. Or still is an air base there in Jacksonville, and so he was in that hospital, and there was a fine doctor from Minnesota who was his doctor there, and he was somewhat impaired, but he still could work after he recovered from that. But I went up and stayed, while he was in intensive care 3 or 4 days there at Jacksonville. Then he had another attack a year and a half later, and he was in Conway, and because he was working in that territory, and he spent the night with Betty and Bill, my sister and her husband, there in Conway, and they called me, and he was taken to the Veterans Hospital there in Little Rock, and he was in intensive care 3 or 4 days then. And then he had one more heart attack before his final one. And the summer of 1970, we had bought a houseboat in partnership with Nancy, his sister, and her husband and family. And it was anchored over on the White River at Clarendon. So the weekend before he died, he and Uncle Speedy and Greg and Kirby, I don't remember whether Scott went or not, but anyway, they brought the boat down to where the White River empties into the Arkansas River, down around Dumas, I believe, is where the crossing is there. And then up the river, and it was a 2-day trip. And Nancy and I, with our other kids, drove down there to where they were spending the night at Dumas, I believe. And then Billy did come home with us. He did not spend the night on the river, but because by that time he had been declared disabled and had limited work. And anyway, wasn't working full time, and so he came on home with us. And the next day, the houseboat was parked if you call that, anchored, I guess, here on just over the levee at the backup from the river, and we went down there to the boat to show some friends of ours the boat. And I distinctly remember that we would take the battery. He would take the battery out of the boat. It was a 12-volt battery, and it was quite heavy. And he carried it all the way up the levee and over to where we were parked. And that night at midnight, he had severe pains, and he had said already he would never, if he had another attack, because he'd had 3, and that was before stents, and before the first cardiologist that Pine Bluff Jefferson Hospital ever had just come to the hospital, and it was midnight when we had called an ambulance and take him to the hospital, and the doctor asked if he might use, well, they hadn't had pacemakers before, and he asked if they could use the pacemaker on the outside of his body, and if it worked to bring his blood pressure up. His blood pressure dropped down in the 40s, and he didn't survive. But of course I gave my permission for that, but they said that if it worked to bring his blood pressure up and he was able to recover, they would put it inside his body. They would insert it into his body. But that's the first I knew about pacemakers, and it just never did come up again, and it was about 6:30 in the morning when he died. But he had said he never would come home from the hospital again if he had another attack. And Kirby was there too. And the preacher, we called our preacher from down at Carr Methodist Church, and he came, so he was there, and he was in the waiting room with Kirby. And he's the one who brought me home. I probably rode out with the ambulance. I can't remember that, but I'm sure I did because I didn't have a car out there. And so the preacher brought me home, and he made a comment about what he thought was a frivolous activity that Kirby engaged in. I'm guessing because Kirby was quite a wit, and he uses sarcasm and that kind of thing. I don't know what he said, but it was something that made the preacher think he was taking it lightly. Of course, he didn't realize, as it takes a little while for anybody to realize that he's not coming home. But I didn't fall apart like some people do, and I didn't take any pain pills. Like I was offered pain pills and that kind of thing. I faced reality, and I went to church the next Sunday, and I had lots and lots of friends and family. Of course, Nancy and Speedy lived here, and Mary Emily and Bill next door, and they continued. The 6 of us had done a lot of things together, like going on trips. I know we went over to Queen Wilhelmina State Park and spent a night over there, and we went to New Orleans, and we went out to eat often together, and we played bridge with Bill and Mary Emily next door. But those 5 of them continued, those 4 of them, with me as the 5th one, we continued to be a group, and they didn't. But a lot of times when that death happens, the friends just drop the single person, whether it's a man or woman, from their schedule. But that didn't happen with me. So I had 2 wonderful extended families, and that lasted for a long time. And that's the reason it's really hard for me now, because I'm the only survivor. Your dad went through a difficult period when he was in the 10th grade. We had bought this house in February of '67, so we'd been in this house for 2.5 years. I've been here 55 years in this house. But he wanted to paint his bedroom black. It was that kind of thing, and that was when the long hair was beginning, and before then all the men had just regular men's shingled haircuts, short haircuts. I wanted to please Scott, but it was a difficult year for us because he didn't understand what was going on, even though that had been, well, I guess for a couple of years, a couple or 3 years, he had a really bad time. And I told him that he could paint the facings all black if he wanted to. Well, he didn't want to do that, so we got over that hitch. Another thing he wanted, go-karts were big right then. And I was scared to death of the go-karts and that he would get hurt, and I would not buy a go-kart for him. I thought I was ameliorating that situation by buying a riding lawnmower. That did not satisfy him at all. Anyway, we got over that, and he always worked in the summers, and in the I don't remember that he had, yeah, some jobs he had during school. I mean, at off hours. He worked at a hamburger drive-in over on West 28th Street. I can't even remember the name of it right now. It's been gone for a long time. And he worked down at the Admiral Benbow Inn when he got to be 16 and had his driver's license, on driving the people, picking up people at the airport or taking them somewhere in town or whatever. And I guess I'm sure he did other things down there at the Benbow Inn. And now Benbow has been, just this year, has been demolished, you know. They're making, and the amazing thing, they're making a go-kart track down there.
What are the odds?
Come full circle. Yeah, well, they haven't actually made the track, but they've cleared most of the Admiral Benbow structure and done some leveling, and you know, I'm sure they're going to bring in some more dirt and gravel and that sort of thing. But they plan to go and finish it within a year, I think.
What would you say to someone who's going through something similar or who's dealing with something?
Well, I would certainly say prayer and sharing the prayers with church friends, and knowing that you're being supported by a large number of people. And of course, you know, I believe that with God, all things are possible. Now, it's true that I can't always see the answers to my prayers, and I think God answers prayers. He may answer them in a very different way or at a very different time, but I live by faith, and that's a great solace to me. Of course, I did miss paying my taxes that first year because I never got a notice. But then when they published the list of people who had not paid their taxes, my name was on the list, and I went to the courthouse to check on it, and they looked in their files, and I told them that I never had gotten a notice, and I didn't remember it because he had always done it. Of course, that didn't apply to them. But they looked in their files, and they had the letter that had been returned to them. And I don't know why, whether they put the wrong address or what happened, but I never got the letter. So I paid my penalty, and since then, I have paid my taxes before they're due, usually after I get the statement in the spring. I've been so blessed, you know, with health. I've had some bumps along the way, like I had a couple of sciatica attacks, which lasted 2 or 3 months each, and I've recovered from those. And I've had shingles a couple of times, but very light cases. But basically, I've been healthy. I've had a few sore throats, and I've had COVID twice, but those were such minimal cases compared to others. Just like one day with a scratchy throat and a watering nose for 3 or 4 days, but other than that. But I haven't been in the hospital since your dad was born 66 years ago. That's a blessing in itself. But just within the last year particularly, people ask me all the time, how I've lived so long and what. And, I've not fallen. Now, I exercise, 3 days a week normally. Plus, I do leg exercises or before I get out of bed every morning, generally. I miss that occasionally. But I do that to keep moving. And I don't think I'm going to die today. I may any day. I hope I get some more of this clutter out of my house. But I've had a lady who helps me supposedly 1 day a week, but she has lots of medical problems, so she doesn't get here much more than half of the time. But the problem is now I don't want to throw anything away. I like to keep everything because, there's a picture of me in Toronto, Spain, and one of the family picture there from Wesley Methodist Church, and then the next picture is the family group out at Uncle David's family in California, and all these things bring me keep the past living with me. I spend a lot of time with memories, and I enjoy going through this old stuff, and it brings me back memories, and particularly about the time I've spent with your family. It was a wonderful time as you all were growing up, and I'm sad to see everybody be scattered, and that's the way life is now. People formerly people lived in the same community with their nuclear family and their extended family for generations, But it's not that way anymore, and change is constant. And I think the exercise keeps me from falling. Now, I may fall today or tomorrow or sometime, but if I do, I'm not going to injure myself as much as someone who probably hasn't exercised along the way. And I think about, how long am I going to get to stay in my house? I'd like to stay as long as I can, but I understand that it's very difficult to get people to come to your home, people you can trust, and people who can care for you. There was a time when women who were left alone as widows would happily go and live with a family and to take care of the elderly or something like that, but not anymore. I mean, not much anymore. You're fortunate to find someone to help you like that.
Do you fear death?
No, because I hope I'm going. I think I'm convinced that I'm going to a better place. I'm not anxious to get there, but I certainly do want to go there.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Well, my life has revolved around the church and schools, and I haven't talked about my professional life very much, but of course I was always interested in English teaching, and in the 1970s, I became the state president of the Arkansas Council of Teachers of English, and while there, that group sent me to the national organization, which was in Minneapolis. And that was the first time I had ever been on a plane. And that was, let's see, in the 70s. I was almost 50 years old. And it was just, and of course, we had annual workshops up on Petit Jean or at Lafayette Hotel in Little Rock. And I just had so many wonderful learning experiences. Then in the 1980s, I was, I don't know how this happened really, but I became the state chairman of the Arkansas Advisory Council on Secondary Education, that is on high schools. And I worked in that for 2 or 3 years. Well, maybe on that more than that long, but it faded away later. the organizations changed. And then in the late 90s, 98, 99, I think, I was the state president of the retired teachers. But I had started at the ground up in each of those. I always participated in the professional organizations in an active way. And if people find out that you will do a job, they're going to call on you to do it. And so, and then in one of those years I guess it was in the 80s, I had an English teacher who was also a friend, and she nominated me as Boss of the Year in professional organizations, and I was awarded that title. And you know, I've had several awards, as you mentioned earlier.
Do you have any regrets or anything you wish you could go back and change?
I would, you know, the Mouser family is not very musically oriented. And because I've been a part of that and all, and I could have done this differently. I would have liked to spend more time with music and musical activities, even just concerts and that sort of thing. I did participate always when they had a community concert association. I always bought tickets for those and enjoyed them. But the lack of music at home, we always sang. My mother sang around the house. She hummed or sang hymns from memory, you know, because we sang the same songs over and over, the wonderful songs like Amazing Grace and 'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus. And I have a long list of those that y'all have to sing at my funeral. And scriptures to read. I have many wonderful memory passages of scripture that I want to have. No, I'll let you get by with whatever you choose to do. You know, I've always tried to do what I thought was right, but I haven't always succeeded. I did say something that was harsh to my older sister-in-law, Hunter, a long time ago, and it caused a break in our relationship for a few years, but we mended that long before her death. Oh, I'm sure I've spoken a lot of harsh words. Would be the things that I've done wrong most often, is to say harsh words or fail to say enough positive words. And I had opportunities all those years. I taught for 39 years, and I missed a lot of opportunities to understand the problems that students might be going through. I was kind of a, quote, hard teacher.
If you had some advice that you would give people, the best case scenario is that anybody is in your shoes in the future. You know, it's like.
Well, I would certainly say thinking of other people and doing things for other people. I mean, that's what Jesus did. He just went about ministering to whoever was sick and lowly and imprisoned, and especially those who were condemned by their peers, you know. I think we need to be less self-centered than most of the people are, many of the people are now. And of course, I'm very sad about Congress and the morality and the immorality, the dishonesty particularly that is in Congress. Money speaks there. The lobbyists are so powerful that when any legislation does get done, it's mainly because of the lobbyist, one being more successful than another. And that saddens me. We just are pretty immoral as a nation anymore. who can you trust? You have to ask the question now. And maybe it was naive on our part, but we didn't have to do that so much. And quote the olden days of my life.
What are you looking forward to tomorrow?
Tomorrow, well, tomorrow's Thursday. Normally, I go to exercise at 12:30. I go from there to the beauty shop normally, and I don't have any organized activity after that. Hopefully sit in my chair and go through some more of this clutter and get rid of it. I keep on my table there usually cards and notes, note paper, that I do send cards to some people who are, for many different reasons, but especially if there's sick or a loss, but also to congratulate people sometimes. And I don't do as many as I would like to, just because, and I wouldn't say I've gotten lazy, but I do like to sit in the chair and take a little nap sometimes. Now, on Wednesday evening and Friday evenings, I meet, there's a group of 6 retired teacher women, all women, who eat together on Wednesday nights, and Friday nights we go to different restaurants around town, you know, and some we have gone out of town. Occasionally we go to Little Rock, or we used to go to Star City, to the country village down there, to the steakhouse down there. And then I enjoy going to the Colonial Steakhouse here in Pine Bluff, and that's where we celebrate most of our family birthdays. And Kirby had a birthday last week, and we haven't celebrated yet, but we will go to the Colonial probably at the end of this week to celebrate his birthday.
When I'm telling my grandkids about you, like, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, as a godly person, for one thing, and is loving, and I don't always come off as a loving person. Sometimes I don't make a big show of affection outside the family, although I smile a lot. And I've never had a problem with anger, and a few people in my family have had a problem with anger. I'm not saying I haven't ever been angry, but and on a scale like in war, I've said the Japs, and I feel bad if I even say that word now, because it is so derogatory. But that was a different time and different circumstances. So,
I have a question about that, actually. I know that we talked about the bombing,
mm-hmm.
and how it changed the world,
mm-hmm.
and it's hard to see ending the war as a bad thing. But how did you feel later? Because at some point you would have learned what it would have been like, and seeing like photos on the ground from what happened in Japan.
Oh.
How did that feel?
Oh, it's a terrible tragedy, of course. War is a bad thing. And I'm not saying that I'm opposed to war. You can grab that from my bedroom if you want to. Mm-hmm. I can't think of anything good that comes from war, except that people learn about other parts of the world and about other people and about their problems. I used to read a book called All Quiet on the Western Front, and it was, I don't recall if it was First World War or Second World War, but it was a German and an American speaking, and they've been on opposite sides in both of those wars I mentioned. And when they got to know each other as people, they were like brothers, brotherly love. But on the larger morality basis or beliefs, whatever you call it, um, people differ so strongly sometimes that they don't know anything else to do but fight, it seems. They think they're going to settle something, but do they ever settle anything? Do they make it better? I'm not sure. Of course, when there's a person like Hitler, you have to do something. I mean, he's just destroyed so many people needlessly. So I have mixed emotions about that. But
you know, as someone who's been through so many of these events, what would you say to people dealing with that kind of unworldly tragedy and what is the best way to deal with it, and what advice would you give to those people in the future?
are you thinking in terms of Ukraine and the war that's going on there, and everybody worldwide gets influenced by even a regional war now? I think negotiation is the best thing, but Satan is alive and well, and he works in all of us. I believe that. I mean, we just have that natural tendency. We have the divine nature too, with which we can fight Satan and sin. And sin is the basis for all of those tragedies and disagreements. Now, I'm not talking about the natural disasters like hurricanes and storms and that sort of thing. That's a puzzlement to me. But God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. And I don't have a good answer to it, but right now, in the negotiations with our president being in Lithuania, and people squabbling over whether Ukraine can come into NATO, I don't think they should logically come into NATO while the war's going on, because it means, I mean, in NATO, nations, as I understand it, agree to protect each other. And most of them are now helping to supply Ukraine, because they think that Putin is the aggressor, which he certainly is. But I don't think it's quite the right time to bring them in, and because I just think that all the NATO nations will be so committed to an active, to participate actively in the war, whereas we can be supportive of Ukraine and hopefully ward off. I don't know what's going to happen in that war. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that, you know, we got a president who's like in his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Being 97, do you think that is a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, in this particular case, I think he is beginning to show some signs of less vitality, and I think it would have been wiser if he didn't run. On the other hand, I don't know of a candidate waiting in the wings who could do as well as he's doing. And I'm certainly fearful of Trump's, he's so dishonest and so ill-willed. And, you know, I know that's getting territorial, but you asked me, and that's, I believe in telling it like it is. Of course, I'm not all wise, but if the country would get back to a sense of unity here within our country in dealing not only with foreign affairs, but also, more importantly, with home affairs, just to have some sensitivity. Now, I don't believe in encouraging laziness, and I'm not opposed to anybody that's able-bodied being required to work in order to get benefits. I feel strongly about that. But I also feel that people who are needy need to be helped. And Jesus didn't ask them any questions about their condition when he said he came to heal the sick, not the well. Anyway. My name is Maddie Etoyle Kirby Mouser, and I'm 97, looking forward to my birthday, the 11th of November, when I will be 98. And I still feel good, and I'm still active. I do tire easily, and sometimes I have to sit down and rest a while. But I've enjoyed this discussion with you, and I hope that you can find it useful that you have done this. And I love you very much. And your helper, and though I haven't known him before, but I can come to love easily. I have no reason not to.